hosting this and for coordinating the webinars. We do appreciate your help. And as Pete said, my name is James Jackson. I'm located in Stephenville, Texas, and get the opportunity to work with lots of county extension agents and landowners on range management, and more specifically weed and brush control issues. What I have today to present to you over the next hour is a series of basics, principles, and methods for doing weed control and brush control methods. And then at the end of the presentation, we're going to go through some common resources that will help you when looking at different brush control issues that you may consider implementing on your place. So we're going to start at the very first step any landowner, operator, land manager needs to take when looking to spray weeds or brush with herbicides. Mixing. Mixing can seem pretty basic, and most of the time it is. But there's always some common problems that you can run into if you do not mix it right. So we're going to go over some basic mixing methods and some of the common problems throughout the next few slides that you need to pay attention to when mixing herbicides. One of the most common problems is the operator. He does not dilute the herbicide with water prior to adding it to the tank. What happens here is they dump in the herbicide into a completely empty tank, and it does not mix very good. An easy solution to this would be to fill the tank up about halfway with water and then add the herbicide. Another common problem is not having enough agitation during mixing. Lots of spray rigs have recirculating pumps on them. By recirculating it through there, it keeps it agitated. And also, so a smaller sprayer or a little pump-up sprayer or a backpack sprayer, you can store it up, you can shake it. You can also slowly add more water to that spray tank just to keep it diluted and keep it agitated. Okay, basic order of mixing. We already kind of touched on this briefly, but if you fill up the sprayer halfway with water, that's going to help everything spread out and come to an even, uniform solution. So if you fill the sprayer halfway with water, then you add the herbicide. Then after the herbicide, add any other additives that you may be using. This would be surfactant, drift control, deposition aids. If you're going to use any blue dye, it'd be a good time to add some blue dye. And then you fill it up to the desired level. And let's say you were mixing up 10 gallons, you'd start with 5 gallons in the spray rig. And then you'd add your herbicide and everything else. And then you'd top it off to 10 gallons. Okay, whenever we start using dry herbicides, we kind of run into some questions on mixing sometimes, so I was going to go ahead and address that too today. Typically, when you're using a dry herbicide, you'll have a rate of so many ounces per acre. Let's throw in an example. Let's say the herbicide we are going to use is a 2 ounces per acre rate. We're going to spray 5 acres with this herbicide. So the product needed would be 10 ounces of product. An easy way to do this would be to weigh out the product or use the little measuring tube that comes with lots of these products. and then dump that amount of the dry herbicide into water and get you a gallon pitcher or something like that and stir it up really good to make a slurry solution out of it. Once all the herbicide is dissolved, you can pour it into the spray tank. However, be sure that you already have some water into the spray tank prior to adding this solution. After you do that, go back to the steps we talked about earlier, add any additives, and then top the tank off with water. Okay, that concludes our section on the mixing. If there's any questions on mixing herbicides, go ahead and type them in the chat box and we'll address them. But another one of the basics of spraying weeds and brush is calibration. Lots of times we guess on, well, we think our sprayers are doing this, and we really do not take the time to ensure that we know what our spray rig is doing. So, by taking half an hour, less than that for lots of people, we can ensure that the spray rig is spraying the correct rate. Proper calibration, it will ensure that you do not over-apply the herbicide, saves you a lot of money, and it also ensures that you do not under-apply it, therefore ensuring the desired results. So those right there are two very beneficial reasons to calibrate. Okay, some general rules of thumb for calibration. Typically, you need the pressure to 20 to 30 psi. I know there are exceptions where you may want to go under or go over, but if you stay in this range right here, that'll be ideal. Another thing is gallons per acre. Typically, you want the gallons per acre in this 10 to 30 GPA. That is the standard rate for most ground broadcast applications. Okay, here are some examples on calibration that are beneficial to look at. Let's say you have the desired amount of 1 quart per acre. Here is the amount of herbicide per 100 gallons. And you can see how it changes as the GPA changes. So once again, about not calibrating, you could screw up your desired rate. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about calibrating a tractor spray rig. Number one step would be to determine the nozzle spacing or the swath width. Stake the course. Get an idea of how long the course will be. Drive the course at the desired speed and RPM. And then a time. How long does it take us to drive that course? Do it twice, do it 3 times. Get the average amount of time that it takes you to drive that course. Then what we are going to do is we are going to catch a nozzle, catch the output for the average drive time. Okay. And right then, if we catch the nozzle, and if we're using one of these pre-selected calibration curves, right there we would determine the ounces caught would equal the gallons per acre. So if you go back to this slide right here, we have the boom sprayer and the boomless sprayer. Those are kind of a general rule of thumb that you can use. We don't have to calibrate that way. There's a few other methods, but for the sake of today's presentation, that's what I was going to talk about today. There's also some very beneficial apps that you can utilize in calibration. Clemson Extension puts out an app that I use all the time and love. Okay, this is a little example that I like to talk about of calibration made very simple. Just to kind of think about some things. Let's say we're going to do 20 gallons to the acre. 20 gallons to the acre, if we're going to spray half an acre, would be 10 gallons. We're going to spray a quarter acre, would be 5 gallons. And then I do a lot of the small research and demonstration plots, and lots of these plots will be 1/8 of an acre, so I use 2.5 gallons. Okay, to summarize calibration, time, how long it takes you to spray a known area, measure the output for the time that it takes to spray the known area. So let's think about this. If we're going to take 5 minutes to spray an area that we know the size of, we're going to measure the output for 5 minutes. Or you can do the math and you can break it down. Then you can multiply it out to get the time to spray 1 acre. And then you can adjust the speed, the pressure, and the nozzles to get the desired output. Okay, before we move on to stem spray guidelines, we have a question. And the question is about the name of the Clemson calibration app. And the name of that app is Just Calibrate. And if you go to the App Store on iPhones, you will search for calibration. There's a few different apps there. The Clemson one I have a lot of experience with, and I like it. None of the other ones I have any experience with, therefore I cannot comment on it. Okay, another basic form of brush control is stem spray. When I was very young, growing up, my dad, we had a little bit of land. He gave me a backpack with Remedy and Diesel, told me to go spray the base on the mesquite trees. So that was my intro into weed and brush control management, spraying mesquites with Remedy and Diesel. Here are a few guidelines of stem spray guidelines. Typically, you want to plant with less than 3 stems. The stem diameter needs to be, on average, less than 6 inches. Lots of people want to do this when it's the wrong time of year for leaf spraying. So they get in a hurry. They think, hey, I got to go attack my mesquites right now. So what they're going to do is they're going to go use the stem spray method. Something else is if it's in a very sensitive area, in an area with some very desirable crops nearby, you can use this method and have a less chance of drift because you are never spraying the herbicide up in the air. Okay, some basic equipment for any type of stem treatment. This nozzle right here is the ConeJet 550 X1 nozzle. It has that very small orifice in it, lets out a very small amount of herbicide. This nozzle will reduce the usage by 80%. if you compare the output for the amount of time compared to this nozzle to a regular leaf spray foliar type of nozzle. Something else that'll help you out is if you use these little screen check valves, 100 mess, and put it behind the nozzle, put it back up in your wand, it will keep the nozzle clean, and you will not be cleaning out the nozzle as much throughout the time spraying, because if you use the X1 nozzle, they do stop up. But you can solve the stopping up by using a mesh screen. Another benefit of the screen is it serves as a check valve. Lots of times using this small of a nozzle, even when you let off of the trigger, it continues to spray. If you put the screen and the valve behind there, it will reduce that quite a bit. Okay, basal treatments can be done a number of ways. You can use lots of different methods and treatments. When my granddad retired and he bought a little bit of land down in the country, he had a lot of mesquites on his place. He started putting remedy and diesel in an old Windex bottle and spraying mesquites. Very cheap and very effective. This right there is kind of a high-class Windex bottle that you can buy at Tractor Supply. You can buy these very cheaply, very cost-effective, and they do a great job of spraying mesquite, spraying the stumps, spraying the stems, and do a good job for stuff like that. Then you can move it on up to a pump-up sprayer. You can buy you a backpack. We have had a lot better success using the piston pump backpacks. They seem to last longer. However, if you are going to run a diesel and remedy through a backpack, you will need to clean it out to prolong the life of a backpack. Okay. Lots of times we think of basal treatment of brush for mesquite. It is very effective on mesquite, but we also have data on all of these species listed here that shows a very high efficacy rate when spraying the base. So, mesquite's the main one, but any of these species that you wish to control, a stem treatment will do a good job of controlling them. Okay, so the mixture that we would recommend you would use would be a 15 up to 25% Remedy Ultra active ingredient tricalipare. So what you would do is you'd use the tricalipare base product, mixing it with diesel, or you could use a vegetable or even a basal bark oil. You would lightly wet all of the stems around this trunk. And what we would recommend is you go from the ground up to 12 inches high. It works any time of the year, and it is no soil activity. So that's an added benefit. So to dig a little bit deeper into the options for part A, and when we talk about part A for this solution, we are going to be referring to the remedy, the tricalipare. And Remedy's the product that everybody talks about. That was kind of the brand name, the trade name. But if you look at the active ingredient tricalipare, you have all of these products right here that contain a 4 pound to the gallon tricalipare based solution. So there's a few different options you could use. Okay, and now let's talk about part B. Part B is going to be the diesel. That's the most commonly used product for basal control. However, they have this basal oil right here, and you can also use vegetable oil, and that will do a good job. Lots of landowners today, or those landowners out there that do not wish to use a diesel on their landscape. And also, there are some areas where they are prohibited from using diesel, and therefore they will need to use a product like this if they are going to do basal stem spray options. Okay, we have a question about spraying persimmon under oaks. Will it damage them? Okay, what you have to be careful about right then is the triclopyr. It is a ester formulated product. When you are spraying the ester, it can volatilize and move up and do some damage to the canopy. So if you are doing that on a hot day, it could cause some damage to some of the oak trees' leaves, canopy. But if you do it in the cool of the morning, if you do it during the winter time when it's cool, it's not as likely to cause some damage. However, you're going to need to use it in accordance to the label, as always. Okay, we can kill a brush very effectively by spraying the base. However, some people get in a hurry and they want instant gratification. They want the brush gone and then they want it dead. So, if we're going to cut it down, with lots of these species we have in Texas, mesquite being the main one, it is a re-sprouting species, which means you cut off the top and it'll come right back. So what that means is you would want to use a cut stump method. Lots of the reasons why we would utilize this is a stem diameter more than 6 inches. They do not want to leave a dead tree present. Lots of times for people who are cutting firewood, the landowner will say, hey, you can come cut firewood on my place, but I'm going to request that you spray the stumps before you leave. And the other one is they are willing to put in a little bit of extra labor for the satisfaction of a cleaner pasture. So, this is a very beneficial method. Common re-sprouted species that we would have in Texas are mesquite, weesats, redberry juniper, and there's many more, but that's the easy list that I could put together of the common ones. And here's the big deal about doing any type of cut stump method. You must spray the stump immediately after you are cutting it. So, a little side-by-side illustration of the positives and the negatives. Remove the plant, you get a cleaner pasture, more rock. And to me, this reason right here is a big reason. Anytime you're doing any type of brush control, brush management, typically if we get 90%, we're pretty happy with our results. That means you're going to have a little bit of regrowth. If I'm going to have regrowth when spraying mesquites, I want it to be up top where I can see it. So in my opinion, doing a cut stump method has its place. It's a beneficial method, but there's some disadvantages to it as well. Okay, to sum up cut stump, you need to spray every stem. You need to spray it very close to the soil surface. You don't, and you can't drag soil across the top of the stump. Lots of people think of trying to rig up a skid steer to grub it and spray it. I'm not saying it can't be done, but you need to really be careful to spray that stump and to spray the entire stump and not drag dirt or soil over the stump before spraying it. Here is a big one right here, and we're about to look at some data. You need to spray it immediately after you're cutting it. You need to adjust the nozzle, deliver across mist, spray the entire surface, include any outer edges, spray the bark from the cut down to the ground level. If you follow these guidelines right here, you'll be very happy. Okay, here is what happens if somebody does not follow the guidelines that we just mentioned. If you look right here, you can see they miss spraying one stem, and it's coming right back up. So every time you cut a stem, you need to spray it. If we go over here, they have a big stump. They did not spray all the way around, and you can see what's coming back up. They got in a hurry, they started to, they go around, and they quit. They didn't go all the way around. So if you miss a little bit, that's the regrowth that I'm talking about. Okay, I mentioned that you need to spray it immediately after you cut it. Here is some older data that I found on a project that was done out in Fort Stockton. And it's a pretty neat little project. They were cutting down the mesquites and looking at different time intervals of spraying the stump. And you can see right here we're up to about 82% mortality on the mesquite trees. And then we get down here and we're at 60% mortality. Look at the time intervals. If we sprayed that stump within 15 minutes of cutting it, we're at 82%. If we sprayed that stump within 8 hours of cutting it, we were down to 60%. Everybody typically brags about 80% mortality. 60% we typically have some complaints about. So if people think, hey, I'm going to cut everything one day, come back and spray it the next day, here's what you may be getting. Something to think about. Okay, back in 2011, a new product for mesquite came out. And this product, the company did a great marketing job on this being the new product, the new standard for mesquite control. And this product's known as Sendero, and it's a great product for spraying mesquite. However, if you're going to spray the mesquite, spray the stump, spray the stem, you do not need to use this product. This product is an amine formulation, and it will not mix in with diesel. So to mix something in with diesel, you need the ester formulation of Remedy, and that's how you need to go about spraying the stems. If you're going to be spraying the leaves of the mesquite, like what most people are doing this time of year, Sendero will do a good job for spraying the mesquite leaves, but not for spraying the base of mesquite when mixing it with diesel. Okay, when we're talking about cut stumps, red berry juniper is another common resprouting species throughout Texas. Lots of people like to cut down junipers, and then they make a subtle spray in the base. This one right here, you can get away with using a totally different mix, spraying it, and spraying the stumps. This mix we have right there on the screen, a Tordon at 4% solution, spray the stump, will do a very good job of preventing that regrowth and finishing out the job of killing that plant. Here are the recommendations right there. Using those, you will do good and you will like the results. Okay, we have a few questions. We're going to go ahead and address those. Okay, one question is, will Sendero mix with vegetable oil? No, Sendero is only made to be mixed in with water. Sendero will not mix with the oil. The other question is Sendero a tricalipero? No, the active ingredients in Sendero are cloperidol and aminoperidol. Anytime you are doing a cut stump or stem spray treatment, you need to use a tricalipero based product. We have another question from Bob. Is Tordon restricted? Yes, Tordon has Piccolo Ram in it. Anything with Piccolo Ram is a restricted use product requiring a private applicator's license. Okay, so something else we were going to talk about was aerial treatment. To me, aerial treatment's one of the basics of brush control. And lots of people in my mind picture aerial treatment as out of their price range, too expensive. It's going to be cheaper to ride around on the ATV spraying the brush than to hire somebody to come in and aerial spray it. So, some of the basics of aerial treatment. It's a most efficient application method for high densities. It allows for application on rough topography. It's the most economical for large areas. An airplane can easily do 1,000 acres in a day. I have not seen anybody on the ATV who can cover that amount of ground. Something else we run into a lot with weed spraying. Lots of times people want to spray their pastures for broadleaf weeds in the springtime. In my area of Texas, we have had a few very wet springs the past couple of years. Too wet to get a spray rig in the pasture. However, a helicopter has an advantage. They don't get stuck in the mud. So here are some basics for aerial treatment of brush control. When the plants are too tall to hand spray, I'm right at about 6 foot tall, a little bit over 6 foot. Typically what I tell the people, if the plant is above your head, you don't need to be trying to spray it. Because if you try to spray a plant that size, you will not be able to get good coverage. Therefore, you will not get good control. Something else, when you plan to treat a large area, another criteria is sensitive crops. If you have any kind of cotton, if you have a grape vineyard, or any other type of sensitive crops nearby, you do not need to be aerial spraying anything. But if there's no sensitive crops nearby, aerial treatment can be beneficial. When the plant density exceeds 400 plants per acre, it's typically when aerial treatment becomes more economical. And something else to consider, will the landowner let the dead tree stand for at least 1 year? Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about brush density. If you have a place with less than 400 trees per acre and you are to clear out the brush, it's going to be very economical to do some type of IPT, individual plant treatment. Something else, any less than that, it'll be more economical to do IPT. However, once we get to greater, the broadcast treatment's the best option. If anybody has a question on what the brush density is, there is a pretty easy way to estimate this right there. If you take an area 66 feet by 66 feet, that equals 1/10 of an acre. If you count the trees in this area and then multiply it out, you'll get the brush density, the trees per acre. So let's say we count 50 trees in here. That would put us at that 500 trees to the acre. Right then, it'd be more economical to do some type of broadcast treatment. So, if we're going to try to get an average brush density of the pasture, do this in a few different areas. Get an average brush density for your pasture. It's pretty easy to get to the cost of broadcast brush treatment. Call a few different applicators, shop around, see what the going rate is. And then here's the bottom line question. Look at the cost. Right here we have a graph that estimates the cost of IPT at various densities. Typically, the cost of spraying mesquite by air is going to be $30 to $40 an acre. If it's right in the middle, and if we have 300 trees per acre, you can see we are at the cutoff point. Once we move to 400 trees per acre, it becomes more cost effective to bring in an airplane, a helicopter, or do broadcast treatment. Okay, I see we have a few other questions. And one question is from Diane, asking about studies, the effect on wildlife in the wildlife program. There was a study that was just released, and the study was conducted by A&M AgriLife Extension in conjunction with Dow AgriSciences. And what we saw was that Sendero does a great job of taking out some of the non-desirable, the mesquite, the honey locust brush species, and leaving some of the more desirable brush species. We do have some data on that. And if you talk to your local county extension agent, they can probably get you in touch with that data. Another question is, with Sendero foliar spraying, how important is complete coverage, especially with resets? I'm not very familiar with resets, but if we are doing IPT with Sendera or mesquite, you need to spray the entire canopy. Complete coverage is very important. For one reason, that tree does not have a circulatory system. It moves stuff from the leaves down to the bud zone. Meaning if you leave a pocket of the leaves untreated, that tree is not going to circulate that herbicide around through that tree. It is going to move it down, leaving that area untreated, what we call as flagging. Somebody else asked, what about control of Borla Nettle? We'll address that here in a minute. Okay, and somebody else is talking about, is it possible to do leaf treatment with a roller rec applicator? I have never seen that done, and I do not think you'd get the coverage that is necessary to get control of those species. Whenever we start talking about coverage, it's essential to get the droplet size right, correct coming out of the aircraft, and also if we're doing IPT, you need to spray each leaf. Okay, we're going to go on and go through the last of this presentation, and then we will come back to any other questions that we have. The Extension Range Unit puts out this publication right here, known as ERM 1466. And this publication lists many different suggestions for chemical weed and brush control. Another beneficial aspect of this publication is if any landowner is looking at any kind of NRCS brush control program, and they're going to get an ECRIB program and some funding from that, the brush management method or practice that they wish to use has to be listed in this publication. So if you look right there on the page 1 of this publication, it kind of gives you how to use this guide. You will see where it says to find your problematic weed or brush species. You go to the page number and then on and on. You see right here we have the weed and brush species listed in this guide. We got a lot of different weed and brush species listed, and we are currently working on a lot more weed and brush species to put in this guide. So let's say you had a question on some different common herbicides. And right here, we have the herbicide common name, and then we have the chemical name. And over here, we have the product, the trade name. And for example, let's say we're going to utilize a tricalapyr-based product. Over here, we have the different trade names of products that are tricalapyr. Okay, then right here, somebody asked about Borla Nettle early on. You can see if we wish to control Borla Nettle, we have the weed controlled right here. Then it gives the herbicide that will do it. That says Piccolo Ram and 2,4-D. And now it gives the rate needed, and the VH is the control rating. So if we're going to do a broadcast application, we would need to do 20 to 32 ounces. If we were going to go hand spray the Borla Nettle, the rate would be 0.63. There are some other remarks that would be useful. If you follow those guidelines, they will give you the best results. But if we look right there, as far as the herbicide, it says Piccolo Ram and 2,4-D. Now we're going to go back right there and let's look, and we're going to find the Piccolo Ram and 2,4-D. And excuse my graph, it's not too good, but you can see Piccolo Ram and 2,4-D is Grazon P plus D, Gunslinger, and there's another product known as Piccolo Ram D. All of those herbicides would do to control Borla Nettle if sprayed at the recommended rate during the right time. Okay, now let's talk about the brush species used in this guide. Mesquite. Mesquite, you can see the recommendations. We have aminoperylate and chlorperylate. Those are the two active ingredients in the herbicide known as Sendero. If we were to spray it at 28 ounces to the acre or at 1%, we would get very high results or high results using the broadcast method. Here are some other remarks, some guidelines to spray it like that. You ought to get these results and you should be happy with the job that it does. Okay, we talked about control rating already. For it to get a VH, it will kill 76 to 100% of the plants. A high, 56 to 75, and then on from there. Okay, something else. Anytime we're talking about weed and brush control, you always need to identify the plant before you decide, do I need to kill it? Is the plant beneficial? And if the plant I do wish to kill, let's identify it and match it up with a control method or a herbicide that would control it. So here are a few different plant ID resources. Here is one that the Extension Range Unit puts out. This is the Plants at Texas Rangeland database. If you go to this website right here, it has lots of benefits. It has lots of helpful resources on it when it comes to identifying plants. Here is what you will see. You can go by flower color. You can go with the location in Texas. You could go with the family of the plant, the seed type, the growth habits, and is it an annual or biennial plant. These are the individual plant species. For prickly pear, it shows you pixels. You can see the fruit, the tunas, the flowers, and on from there. There is an app that can go on the smartphone. And it's pretty handy to have when you're out in the field. And this app's put out by the Botanical Research Institute of Texas. There's what it gives out for Algerita. And it will tell you a little bit about that plant, give you an image, and help you ID it. Another useful app is LeafSnap. This app's pretty neat by allowing you to take a picture of the leaf, and then it'll help you ID it. So that's another useful tool you can utilize in trying to ID the weeds and the brush species that you have. And you can see right there, you take a picture of this leaf, and it comes up with what it could be right there. And I've used this a few times, and it'll get you pretty close, and it'll help you out. Here's another weed ID app, Agweed ID. Helps out quite a bit. And with that, that concludes the presentation. Now we're going to go ahead and address a few questions. And I see we got quite a few questions here in the chat box. Okay, we have one question on a prickly pear control. Anytime we're going to utilize or we are going to control prickly pear chemically, we need to utilize something with Piccolo Ram or fluroxypyr in it. Either one of those two active ingredients are very effective on controlling prickly pear. So if we were to use a product known as Tordon 22K, Surmount, or Pastoral Guard HL, they all control prickly pear very good. Sendero will not control prickly pear on a regular, reliable basis. Vista will do a good job, and anything with Piccolo Ram in it will do a good job.
Yeah, I'm scrolling up and down here. I see Perry asked a question as per Dr. Redmond. I've been treating my coastal with Pastora for KR for 4 years. It looks like they haven't made a change as to timing to apply it. I've been doing 2 a year. Can you tell me how you would suggest this at this point?
Okay, well, Perry, we have done some trials, or Dr. Redmond has, using Pastora to control KR bluestem. And what we typically would recommend is to do 1.5 ounces the initial treatment, wait 6 weeks, and come back and hit it with 1 ounce. I realize this is a very costly treatment, and I also realize that it's not always that easy to get out there the timing that it is needed to. But those are the only suggestions I can make on how to battle KR bluestem in the coastal field. You and lots of other landowners in Texas are having that problem.
Yeah, Diane asked about the control of Agarita.
Diane, Agarita is a tough species to control. If we look at the leaf on the Agarita, it's a very thick, waxy, tough to penetrate leaf. So the only control recommendations that I can give you would be to spray the base with Remedy and Diesel. And I realize an Agarita has multiple stems, and it's not going to be very easy or fun spraying those bases. Something else I would encourage you to look at is look at the wildlife benefits of Agarita and decide, do you really have a problem, or is that a beneficial plant to some wildlife?
Okay, we made jelly out of it growing up. JCS says going all the way back to mixing, putting dye in before herbicide helps identify any otherwise invisible splashes or spills, contamination. Is there any downside to adding dye before the herbicide?
Well, the downside is you're going to see everything. So there are no downside. You can add the dye before, you can add it after. None that I know of. But it's one of those things, is your cuff Is your cup halfway full or halfway empty? If you add the dye, you'll see everything you do and you'll see how sloppy you are. That could be good, that could be bad, so do it to please yourself.
That uh, uh, Travis asks, is best herbicide control for honey locust with a foliar spray?
Okay, Travis, if you're going to go spray honey locust by hand, we did some projects on that a while back, and we were looking at Sendero on honey locust. And I know when Sendero came out, we were very excited, saying it's the new standard for mesquite control. Well, what I'd like to ask you to think about is think about the similarities between mesquite and honey locust. Both of those species are legume. Both of them have a pinnately compound leaf. And what we have seen is Sendero does a very good job on honey locust, applied as an aerial treatment or applied as an IPT treatment.
Okay. Uh, Kathy says, please help on deciding when to foliar spray mesquite. I know the basic rule, but in any given field, some have yellow flowers while some white. Some small beans, some long beans, and some bush plants have all of these. Do you just keep waiting?
Okay, Kathy, that's the question everybody's asking. What I'm going to say is, what type of treatment are you looking at? Because if you're going to do a big, large-scale aerial treatment, you're going to need to keep waiting and trying to get the mesquite bean elongation completed. Once you get those beans elongated, spray it. Another thing is, if you're going to go hand spray it, you're going to get better coverage, and I'm going to say let that soil temp get up to 75 degrees, which most areas in Texas are at by now, and then go spray it.
Okay. The next question is, any advice for controlling eastern red cedar with Tordon 22K as IPT?
You know, typically with any other juniper species, such as eastern red cedar, Tordon 22K will do a good job. The only problem is you have to get really good coverage on that plant. So to get really good coverage, we're going to have to paint the plant. And lots of times what happens, if you look at the economics, for every foot that a height that plant grows, the cost is going to double. So what I like to say, it's very beneficial when they're knee high. After you get much taller than that, you may need to look at other control options.
The next question is, for cut stump leaf treatment, what aquatic approved herbicide would you recommend?
I am not familiar enough with aquatic herbicides to recommend one. I'm going to say contact your local county agent, and he will help you get that information. We have some people within Extension here who are very knowledgeable on the aquatic weed control.
And William asks recommendations for controlling manshedder.
Moss odor, that's a common problematic weed species. Typically with moss odor, you need to spray it very early, spray it when it is very small to reap any benefit out of spraying it. If you will spray it when it is small, lots of your weed control herbicides such as Grazon Max, Cimarron Max will do a good job. Once that species gets a little bit bigger, you'll need to add some dicamba to it, and that'll help you control the moss odor. But what I'm going to caution you about is if the moss odor was already 2 feet tall, you need to ask yourself, how much am I going to gain by spraying it? We typically spray weeds to grow more grass, and if we wait too late, how much more grass are we going to grow?
Next question is, do you have any comments on the hack and spray technique?
You know, in Texas, we do not use that a lot. I mean, what that is just an additional method to get that herbicide into the plant. So those are the comments that I have. And now I see people are having a hard time finding the calibration app.
Yeah.
I know in the past when you go to the App Store and look at calibration, it has been right there on the iPhone.
Yes, I did a search on my computer, and it comes up as Calibrate My Sprayer, Clemson University. And if you search for Calibrate My Sprayer, Clemson University, you should find it. Yes, sir.
All righty, thank you, Pete. And I know there are other calibration apps, and I'm not out to endorse any one, but that one I've got experience with.
Speaking of honey locust, if you cut it, what's the best herbicide for the stump?
You know, honey locust is going to be one of those. If you spray it with Remedy and Diesel, it'll do a good job.
So kind of on the flip side of that, there's another question from Travis says, what about grubbing for honey locust? Does locust have the root bud like mesquite? And the follow-up question is, will Sermont work on locust foliar? I have a lot of Sermont on hand.
Okay, well, when we were doing some studies with honey locust, yes, we have seen some good results with Surmount on honey locust. It'll do a good job. And the thing I'm going to caution you about is Surmount has Piccolo Ram in it. Piccolo Ram has soil activity. So do not get the Piccolo Ram up underneath a desirable tree. So yes, to answer your question, Surmount would be effective on honey locust.
Okay, doke. As we go on, next question, let me kind of put this out right quick. I put a link. If you click on the link, it'll take you to a survey. Please complete the survey. We'll be all questions, all answers are anonymous, so any input would be great. And we'll hit some other questions. Let me hit this right quick. Our next session is going to be August 3rd, 2017. The Legume Family's Technosophy and Important Family Members, and our speaker is going to be Dr. Baron Rector. If you're not following us, you can follow us on Facebook, on facebook.com/txrange. We have an educational page, and we normally post twice a week, some educational event. Okay, the next question is, Kathy asked about Sendero on foliar.
Yes, Kathy, to spray Sendero, you need to be spraying the leaves on the mesquite trees. So Sendero has to be applied foliar.
Leslie asks, is the Guide to Texas Range Pasture app available for the iPhone?
I'm not sure about that. Pete, do you have any
No, I don't.
experience with that?
I'm not sure. The you're not really. I guess the question I would have is, I'm confused with that. They're not talking about the Range Plants website, rangeplants.tamu.edu website.
That's what I'm
Right
thinking.
now, I know that we're working on it. It's not what we consider quite mobile friendly, but we're working on it. And James, they were asking about the slides. People wanted a copy of your slides, and I see Wesley asking again about slides. How do you want to? How do you want to email them to them? They put in their email address. Can you email it to them, or how would you like to handle that?
Wrote this.
because some of these mailing systems, if the slides are so big, they reject the email. It's really hard uh, to email slides sometimes.
Exactly. Pete, wrote the presentation be
The whole
available
entire
online?
webinar will, but not the PowerPoint.
Okay,
We could convert the PowerPoint
got you.
to PDF and email it. Yes.
Could we do that? All righty,
Okay,
well,
so
let's
if
do it
anybody's
that
interested
way.
in today's PowerPoint presentation, please type in your email address and we will convert it to PDF and be emailing it to you. I'm gonna go ahead and try to kick out this survey link again. And if it covers it up, covers your screen up, just go ahead and you still with us? Answer that. And I'm looking to see if I missed any other questions. I think we
I think we're good. Thank you all very much, and hope to see you all again at the
thank
next
y'all.
webinar.